If you've ever discovered that your own family had already replaced you before you were even gone, then you'll understand exactly how I felt that Friday afternoon. Because while I was sitting beside my grandfather's hospital bed, holding his hand during the final hours of his life, the rest of my family was already making plans for his $25 million estate. Not mourning, not praying, planning. Planning which house they'd take, planning which trucks they'd keep, planning how they'd divide the ranch, planning vacations they hadn't earned, and, apparently, planning a celebration that didn't include me. The funny thing? They believed Grandpa had forgotten me. The painful thing? They wanted him to. What happened next changed my life forever. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 48 years old. I live outside Bozeman, Montana. I own a small horse rehabilitation ranch where injured rescue horses get a second chance. It's not glamorous. It doesn't make magazine covers. It doesn't turn me into a millionaire. But every morning I wake up knowing I helped something broken stand again. To me, that's enough. I've been widowed for almost 9 years. Cancer took my husband, David, when he was only 50. He was my best friend, my business partner, the man who believed in me long before anyone else did. After he passed, the ranch nearly failed. Bills piled up, the mortgage fell behind. Some weeks I honestly didn't know how I was going to keep the lights on. But somehow we survived. One horse at a time, one customer at a time, one day at a time. Through all of it, one person never stopped believing in me, my grandfather, Walter Brooks. To the rest of the family, he was Grandpa. To the business world, he was a legend, a self-made rancher who turned a struggling cattle operation into one of the largest privately owned agricultural companies in the Northwest. His name carried weight. Banks respected him, politicians visited him, business owners admired him. But none of that impressed me, because the man I knew was the grandfather who taught me how to mend a broken fence, how to saddle a horse, how to shake someone's hand properly, how to keep my word. He always said, "Money doesn't reveal character, it introduces it." At 12 years old, I thought it sounded clever. At 48, I realized it was one of the truest things I'd ever heard. Growing up, family dinners always looked perfect from the outside. Inside, they were something else entirely. My younger brother, Ryan, was the golden child. He wore expensive suits before he turned 30, worked in finance, drove luxury SUVs, lived in a gated community outside Denver. Mom couldn't stop talking about him. Dad called him the future of the Brooks family. Meanwhile, I was the daughter who smelled like horses, the widow who lived on a ranch, the one who never became successful. At least, not by their definition. Every Thanksgiving followed the same script. So, Ryan just got another promotion. Ryan's investment portfolio is incredible. Ryan met another CEO. Then someone would eventually ask, "And Sarah, how are the horses?" Not the business. Not my employees, not my life. The horses. As if everything I'd built was just a hobby. I stopped correcting them years ago. The only person who truly understood was my grandfather. Every Sunday afternoon, I'd drive to his ranch. We'd sit on the wraparound porch overlooking the valley, coffee in hand, watching the horses graze. Sometimes we'd talk business, sometimes politics, sometimes football. Sometimes nothing at all. He appreciated silence. So did I. Those afternoons became our tradition. No cameras, no social media, no family performances. Just two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. As Grandpa got older, those Sundays became even more important. His knees started bothering him. Walking became harder. Then came the heart problems. Then the hospital visits. The doctors did everything they could, but time catches all of us eventually. I began driving him to appointments, picking up prescriptions, helping with paperwork, not because anyone asked, because that's what family does. Or at least, that's what I believed. Ryan rarely visited, maybe once every few months, usually just long enough to post a photo online, Sunday with Grandpa. People loved those pictures. They had no idea the visit lasted 15 minutes. One afternoon, about 8 months before Grandpa passed, he looked across the pasture and quietly said, "Funny thing about old age." I smiled. "What's that?" "You discover who loves you and who loves your belongings." I didn't answer, because I already knew. He looked at me and grinned. "Don't worry, I've been paying attention." At the time, I thought he meant emotionally. I had no idea how literally he'd been paying attention. 3 weeks before he died, Grandpa asked me to meet him at his attorney's office. It wasn't unusual. Sometimes he needed help reading paperwork. Sometimes he just wanted company. That afternoon, Grandpa signed several documents. The attorney, Mr. James Whittemore, looked unusually serious. Before we left, Grandpa placed his weathered hand over mine. "No matter what happens after I'm gone," he paused. "Promise me something." I nodded. "Anything. Don't fight with them." I frowned. "Them?" He smiled sadly. "You know exactly who." I did. I just didn't understand why he was saying it. The following month, Grandpa's health declined quickly. The hospital called me just after sunrise. I drove 2 hours through heavy snow. By the time I arrived, he was awake, weak, but smiling. We spent nearly 4 hours together, talking about David, talking about Grandma, talking about my kids, talking about horses. Not once did he mention money. Not once did he mention inheritance. As I stood to leave, he squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you." Those were the last words he ever said to me. He passed away peacefully early the next morning. The funeral drew nearly 400 people. Business leaders, neighbors, ranchers, old friends, church members, former employees, people whose lives Grandpa had quietly changed over 6 decades. Everyone had a story. Everyone had a memory. Everyone, except my family, seemed focused on honoring him. During the reception, I noticed something strange. My parents, Ryan, my Aunt Linda, my cousin Mark, they kept disappearing into another room, laughing, whispering, looking at paperwork. At first, I assumed they were handling funeral logistics. Then I walked past the conference room. The door wasn't completely closed. Inside, champagne bottles sat on the table. Champagne at Grandpa's funeral. Ryan raised a glass. "To $25 million. Everyone laughed. Mom smiled. "We've waited long enough." Dad unfolded a county property map. "We'll sell the North Ranch first." Aunt Linda pointed toward another parcel. "I already have a buyer." Then Ryan said something that made my blood run cold. "What about Sarah?" Mom shrugged. "She wasn't invited." More laughter. Dad smiled. "She's too emotional." Ryan leaned back in his chair. Besides, Grandpa finally realized who deserved everything. Someone clinked a champagne glass. They actually toasted. Before the executor had even arrived, before a single legal document had been opened, before Grandpa had even been buried. I quietly stepped away. Not angry, just heartbroken. Because for the first time in my life, I realized they hadn't lost a father or a grandfather. They'd lost an investment. I walked outside into the cold Montana air. Snowflakes drifted across the cemetery. I stared at Grandpa's freshly covered grave. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." Just then, a black sedan pulled into the church parking lot. A tall man in a charcoal overcoat stepped out carrying a worn leather briefcase. I recognized him immediately. James Whittemore, Grandpa's executor. He glanced around the parking lot, then looked directly at me. "Sarah, he called. "I've been looking for you." I wiped my eyes. "Is everything okay?" He smiled. "Your grandfather left very specific instructions. He said the reading cannot begin until you are in the room." I looked toward the fellowship hall. Inside, my family was still celebrating a fortune they believed was already theirs. None of them had any idea that Grandpa planned one final surprise, one that would leave the entire room speechless. The church fellowship hall was louder than ever. Champagne glasses clinked. People laughed. Someone had even discussed renovations to Grandpa's ranch house. He hadn't even been buried for 3 hours, yet my family was already spending money that wasn't legally theirs. I stood beside James Whitmore, Grandpa's executor, outside the fellowship hall doors. He looked at me with the same calm expression Grandpa always admired. "You ready?" I shook my head. "No." He smiled softly. Neither were they. He opened the door. The room gradually became quiet. My father immediately frowned. "There she is." Ryan rolled his eyes. "I thought you went home." Mom folded her arms. "This is family business." James calmly interrupted. "It certainly is." He placed his leather briefcase on the long oak table. "I'm James Whitmore. For those who don't know me, I've represented Walter Brooks for 34 years. He left extremely detailed legal instructions. And before anyone asks," he looked directly at my father, "no, there will be no private meeting. Mr. Brooks specifically instructed me to read everything publicly." The room immediately fell silent. Ryan leaned back confidently. "Let's get this over with." James slowly removed a thick cream-colored envelope. Across the front, written in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting, were 7 simple words. "Read before opening my last will." James carefully broke the wax seal, adjusted his glasses, then began reading. "If you're hearing this, I've gone home. Don't waste today arguing over money. Spend it remembering me." Several guests quietly nodded. My family remained expressionless. James continued. "Unfortunately, I know exactly what some people are already discussing." A few relatives exchanged awkward looks. "If champagne has already been opened, then you've proven my point." The room froze. Every face slowly turned toward the champagne bottles still sitting on the side table. Ryan's smile disappeared. Mom looked horrified. Dad swallowed hard. Grandpa knew. He had actually predicted it. James continued. "For the last 3 years, I've quietly watched every member of my family, not because I distrusted them, because money has a way of revealing people." James reached into the briefcase, then removed something unexpected, a small leather notebook. "I believe Mr. Brooks was referring to this." He opened it. Every page was filled with Grandpa's handwriting. Dates, names, visits, phone calls, notes, observations, every single interaction. James began reading. February 11. Sarah brought groceries, stayed 4 hours, asked for nothing. Another page. March 2nd. Ryan visited, asked whether I'd updated my estate plan, stayed 22 minutes. Another page. April 18. Sarah repaired the south fence, refused reimbursement. Another. June 5th. My son asked about commercial zoning. Another. August 21st. Family reunion. Everyone wanted pictures. Only Sarah stayed afterward to clean. The room became painfully quiet. James closed the notebook, then looked around. Walter Brooks documented nearly every family interaction for over 3 years. Nobody spoke. Nobody could, because Grandpa hadn't relied on opinions. He relied on facts. Dad finally stood. "This doesn't change anything." James calmly replied, "No, it explains everything." He unfolded another handwritten page. "To my children, I loved you more than you'll ever know. But somewhere along the way, you started measuring success with bank accounts instead of character. Mom lowered her head. Tears rolled down her face. Not dramatic tears, embarrassed tears, the kind that come when truth finally catches up to you. James turned another page. To my grandson Ryan, you became successful in business, but success without humility becomes arrogance. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. For the first time all afternoon, he looked nervous. Then James smiled slightly. I believe we're now at the portion everyone has been waiting for. The room leaned forward. He opened another sealed envelope, the last will and testament of Walter Henry Brooks. He paused. As many of you know, the estimated value of Mr. Brooks' estate has been reported at $25 million. Several people nodded. James looked up. That figure is incorrect. Confused whispers filled the room. James continued. Following the recent sale of mineral rights, the expansion of Brooks' agricultural holdings, and several investments made over the last decade, the total estate value is, he looked down, $38,700,000. The room exploded. Someone literally dropped a coffee mug. An aunt gasped loudly. Ryan whispered, "What?" Dad looked like all the color had drained from his face. James calmly continued. Every acre, every mineral right, every business interest, every investment account, every remaining asset. The room stopped breathing. Because long before my death, he proved he loved me when everyone else was counting dollars. Travis shot to his feet. This isn't fair. Harold calmly met his eyes. No, he said quietly. It isn't. Fair would have been visiting your grandfather because he was lonely. Silence. Dad tried to speak. Nothing came out. Mom buried her face in her hands. Harold folded the letter one final time, then read Grandpa's last sentence. If anyone questions my decision, tell them to read Daniel's calendar and compare it to their own. No shouting followed, no dramatic argument, only silence. Because sometimes the truth is louder than anger. My father slowly walked toward me. For the first time in my life, he looked small. Very small. I'm sorry, he whispered. I looked at him for several seconds, then quietly answered, I would have traded every acre for one more afternoon with Grandpa. More tears filled the room, because everyone knew that was exactly why Grandpa chose me. I never wanted his money. I simply wanted more time with the man who believed in me. As Rebecca and I walked outside, the evening sun settled across the Harper farm, the same fields Grandpa had worked his entire life, the same porch where we'd shared countless conversations, the same land people had nearly destroyed a family over. I smiled through tears, because Grandpa's greatest inheritance was never the $26 million. It was the lesson he left behind. Character is revealed when money enters the room. And on the day my parents disowned me, Grandpa's final secret revealed exactly who everyone truly was. The end.